Well, this house is for my family now, and if you want to stay, you'll have to help out with whatever's needed around here. My son, Alex, said it with a dry tone, like someone laying down the rules for a stranger. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I'm 78 years old and I was born in Harmony, Pennsylvania. I lived almost my whole life in a small house I inherited from my parents. I worked in construction since I was a kid, hauling bricks and putting up walls until I made foreman. I never made a fortune, but I always had enough to live with dignity. When I retired, I kept doing small jobs to supplement my income, and it was thanks to that discipline that I was able to put a little nest egg aside. Before we go on, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss any stories. I post new stories every day. Leave a like and let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. My youngest son, Alex, was living with his wife, Teresa, in a rented apartment in Newcastle. Things weren't going well. The rent went up. His boss was late with his paycheck, and before I knew it, they were on the verge of being evicted. I knew what it was like to not have a roof over your head, so I sold my little house and used my savings to buy a bigger one with 3 bedrooms, so we could all live together. I thought I was helping the family and securing a bit of peace for us. On moving day, I got up early, made coffee, and warmed up some pastries. I helped Alex and Teresa move their few suitcases into the back room. I felt proud. The house still smelled of fresh paint. The yard was clean, and for a moment I imagined this would be the start of a better time for all of us. In the afternoon, when I got back from the grocery store, I found a truck parked outside. People were unloading mattresses, bags, a stove. I recognized Teresa's mother, Louise, but along with her came her father, 2 brothers, an aunt, and a teenage cousin. They were walking in and out as if they already owned the place. Teresa, smiling, said they'd be staying for a few days while they got settled. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. In the following days, I realized it wasn't a temporary stay. Teresa's father took over a corner of the living room with his things. Her mother moved my pots and pans from their spots. The brothers started using my yard to leave their bikes, and the requests began, though they sounded more like orders. "Arthur, can you get more water? You could sweep the yard." There was no please or thank you. Alex stayed quiet. Sometimes he'd avoid looking at me as if he didn't want to face the situation. But when he finally spoke, it was to remind me that for him, this house now belonged to his family, and if I wanted to stay, I had to help out. I didn't answer him, I just looked at him. Then I looked down at my hands and went back to cleaning my boots. I started spending more time on the porch. I'd hear the laughter coming from the living room, the sound of the pot on the stove, voices filling every corner of the house. I didn't need to say anything to feel my space there shrinking bit by bit, and that feeling of standing in a place I had paid for, but where I no longer seemed welcome, settled in silently. The morning after Alex's words, the sun came through my bedroom window, but it didn't bring warmth. It brought a weight. I got up earlier than everyone else. As always, I made coffee for myself without making a sound. Before, when we lived in my little house, I used to make coffee for everyone. I'd fill the table with sweet rolls and serve the plates with care. Now I didn't even know if there was room to leave a pot on the table without someone moving it. I went out to the yard with my mug and sat down to look at the sky. It was a clear day with that kind of blue that only Pennsylvania seems to know how to give. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Teresa's father, who barely greeted me with a nod before heading for the gate. Not even a good morning. A few minutes later, 2 of Teresa's brothers came out with their bikes, kicking up dust, and one of them left the gate open. I didn't feel at home anymore. Every corner was occupied by something that wasn't mine. In the living room, Teresa's aunt had spread a blanket over the sofa to sleep. In the dining room, there was a large box of clothes I didn't recognize. In the kitchen, my utensils were mixed with theirs, and the old pans I had used for years were now stacked in a corner, as if they were useless. That day, while I was pouring myself a little more coffee, I overheard a conversation in the kitchen. Teresa was telling her mother, "We'll be better off here, Mom. No one's going to kick us out of here." Her mother replied, "Well, yes, this house is perfect for all of us. Arthur's old. He doesn't need this much space." They didn't know. I was listening. Or maybe they did, and didn't care. I didn't answer. I went to my room, opened the drawer of my nightstand, and took out the envelope where I kept the house papers. I ran my hand over the deed, that document that bore my name, and put it back. That piece of paper was the only thing that still reminded me that even if they wanted to erase me, I was still the owner. As the days went on, the routine changed completely. They no longer asked me if I wanted to eat. They'd serve themselves, and if there was anything left, they'd leave it for me on the table. Sometimes I had to reheat whatever was left. I didn't mind cooking for myself. What hurt was feeling that they had decided to push me away from the table without saying it out loud. When Alex was around, he'd stay in his room with Teresa. We hardly spoke. When he did, it was to ask if I could give him a hand with something. Take his brother-in-law's motorcycle to the shop, go pay the utility bill because, the people at the office better, or fix a door that had gotten stuck. They were errands disguised as trust, but I knew they were just tasks they didn't want to do. I started to observe more. I don't mean watching, but noticing. I noticed the electricity bill went up a lot with so many appliances, so many cell phones charging. I noticed the pantry emptied in a few days, and that what I bought from the market disappeared quickly. I noticed that no one besides me ever cleaned the yard. One day at the end of the week, I came back with a big bag of beans, rice, and oil. I had barely put the things on the table when Teresa said, "Oh, Arthur, good thing you brought that. Now we'll have enough for everyone." And she started putting everything away without even offering me a glass of water. That "for everyone" echoed in my head like a drill. Despite everything, I didn't show my anger. Rage, when it's let loose without measure, is wasted. I preferred to save it. I knew that if I exploded, they would use it to paint me as the grumpy old man who doesn't want to share, and I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. In the afternoons, I would sit on the little bench by the entrance. From there, I'd watch the street, greet the neighbors, and above all, think not about how to leave, but about how to stay, but stay on my own terms. Sometimes silence is a sharper weapon than a knife. One night, while everyone was in the living room watching TV, I went out to the yard with a blanket and just stood there looking at the stars. I remembered when Alex was a boy running through dirt roads barefoot with a worn-out ball. I remembered how I built him a wooden tricycle because there was no money for a real one. I remembered the day he hugged me tight after I defended him from some older boys. And I wondered at what point that child stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as an obstacle. But sometimes questions don't have immediate answers. The only thing I was sure of was that I wasn't going to let them slowly push me out of my own life. I'm not a man of many words, but when I say them, they have weight. And for now, the weight was in the silence. A few days passed without any major incidents, but the atmosphere was the same. Teresa's family talked about our house in front of me as if I were invisible. Alex didn't correct anyone. I started getting up earlier to have a moment of peace before everyone woke up. That time was mine. The coffee, the fresh air, and the sound of birds on the power line. One morning while I was sweeping the yard, one of Teresa's brothers said to me, "Ma, hey Arthur, can you hurry up? We're going to put some meat on the grill." I looked at him steadily, calmly, and said, "Nobody rushes me here, son. I cleaned this yard at my own pace." He didn't shout, but he walked away muttering something I didn't understand. That day I confirmed that even if I didn't raise my voice, the way I looked at them and responded made them uncomfortable. And that gave me a small satisfaction because although they wouldn't say it, they were starting to realize that I wasn't the kind of man who lets himself be pushed around without putting up a fight. That night I locked myself in my room and, as had become my habit, took out the envelope with the deed. I placed it on the table and looked at it for a long time. It wasn't just a document, it was my strongest card. But it wasn't time to play it yet. I needed them to truly believe I was defeated. Only then would the time would the blow be more effective. For now my plan was simple. Endure, observe, and wait. Because patience, when mixed with memory, becomes something much more powerful than rage. One Tuesday morning, the noise in the house started before the sun came up. It was 6 a.m., and I could already hear the blender, the TV in the living room, and Teresa's cousin talking on the phone at full volume. I was sitting on my bed looking out the window, and I thought that maybe it was time to change my routine. Not to admit to them, but so they wouldn't always find me in the same place at the same time as if I were part of the furniture. I got dressed, packed my most personal things in a box, some photos, an old watch, the envelope with the deed, and put them inside the wardrobe. It wasn't that I was afraid they'd take them, but I preferred them not to be in plain sight. Then I left without saying anything and walked to the town square. I sat there for a while on a bench, greeting acquaintances, drinking a strong black coffee I bought from a stand. It was the first morning in weeks that I felt the air belonged to me. When I returned, the kitchen was full. Teresa's mother and aunt were arguing about what to make for lunch while her father watched TV with his feet on the table. Alex wasn't there. They looked at me as if they had just realized I lived there. I didn't say anything. I went straight to my room and started reading an old newspaper. That afternoon, I ran into Alex in the yard. He asked if I could lend him some money to help a friend with the rent on a garage where he kept a motorcycle. I looked at him, took a deep breath, and replied, "I can't right now, son. I'm saving up for my own things." He didn't like that. His face changed, but he didn't insist. It was the first time since we moved that I had said no to him, and even though it hurt, I felt it was necessary. In the following days, I started going out more often. I'd go to the market, but I'd also stop to chat with neighbors or visit an old friend who had a carpentry shop. I didn't say much about my situation, but I listened. I observed. Every outing was a reminder to me that there was a world outside those walls, and that not everything was under the control of Teresa's family. One Sunday morning, while everyone was asleep, I got up early and made breakfast. Eggs with bacon, fresh toast, hot coffee. I met the vehicle just like I used to, with clean plates and folded napkins. I sat down to eat alone. By the time they started getting up, I was already washing my dishes. Teresa said to me, "Oh, you didn't make enough for everyone," I replied without looking at her. "Today I cooked for myself." Everyone knows how to start their own day. The kitchen fell silent for a few seconds. Then I heard her mother mutter something under her breath, but I didn't care. That small gesture gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. It was my way of setting a boundary, even if it was in the simplest thing, and I discovered that it made them uncomfortable. They weren't used to me acting on my own without offering them anything. Over time, I started doing other similar things. I washed my clothes separately, kept my food in a bag inside my wardrobe, and locked my bedroom door when I went out. It wasn't to isolate myself, but to make it clear that there were parts of me and my things that did not belong to them. One Thursday afternoon, Teresa's older brother left his motorcycle in the yard, blocking the path that to the laundry area. When I arrived with a bucket of clothes, I asked him to move it. He said he was in a hurry and would move it later. I didn't argue. I went to my room, got my set of keys, and moved the motorcycle myself, placing it on the sidewalk outside. He came out annoyed, saying I had no right to touch it. I looked him in the eye and replied, "And you have no right to block my path in my house." That last phrase left him speechless. That night, Alex came into my room. He didn't knock as usual. He asked if there was a problem with his family leaving a few more things in the yard because they were fixing up a room for themselves. I told him the yard wasn't a storage unit and that if they wanted space, they could find it elsewhere. He pressed his lips together and said I was changing. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence carries more weight than an argument. Meanwhile, I kept storing everything in my memory. I didn't write it down, but I remembered every look, every word, every sign of disrespect, not out of resentment, but because I knew that one day that information would be useful. At night, when the house fell quiet, I would stay on the porch looking at the distant lights on the hill. I thought about my father, who taught me to never give up. He used to say, "Son, the land you work with your hands is yours, but you have to defend it." And even though the land was now made of concrete and brick, the principle was the same. There was a day I decided not to eat at home. I left early, went to the market, bought a plate of barbecue from a food truck, and ate it sitting in the square. When I returned, Teresa told me they had made food and saved me a plate, but with a tone that didn't sound like kindness, but like control. I thanked her, but told her I had already eaten. That simple answer seemed to irritate her more than I imagined. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to let them decide even what I ate. Every action of mine, no matter how small, was a way of reclaiming the right to decide over my own life. And so little by little, the house began to feel my absences and my silences. I wasn't the quiet old man in the corner. I was the man who was starting to slip out of their reach, who didn't respond as they expected. And although they didn't know it yet, every step I took outside of their control was a brick I was removing from the wall they had built between us. I knew it would be a while before things reached a breaking point. But I also knew that when that moment came, they wouldn't find me weak or resigned. They would find me ready. The tension in the house was no longer invisible. You could cut it with a knife, like how the air gets heavy before it rains. I felt it in every step I took down the hallway. Every time I opened the kitchen door and was met with looks that didn't include me, they didn't have to say anything. The walls spoke for them. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in the yard sweeping dry leaves. Teresa's older brother was sitting in a plastic chair looking at his phone. I walked over and asked him to move his backpack, which was blocking the path to the laundry area. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "I'll move it in a minute." I kept sweeping, but 10 minutes later the backpack was still there. I walked over, picked it up, and put it in a corner. That's when he lifted his head and said, "Hey, Arthur, you have no right to touch my things." I looked at him steadily and replied, "And you have no right to leave your things in other people's way. Learn that." The words weren't loud, but they were heavy. He got up, huffed, and went inside the house. A few minutes later, I heard him talking to his mother and Teresa in the kitchen, saying I was in a bad mood. I didn't care. I went back to my work. That same night, when Alex got home, Teresa met him at the door. I didn't hear everything, but I managed to catch my name several times. He came into my room without knocking, as was his custom now. "Dad, what's going on?" "They tell me you're fighting with everyone." I closed the newspaper and looked at him. "I'm not fighting with anyone, son. I'm just asking for respect. And if your people have a problem with that, it's not my problem." That last part hurt him. He stood there for a few seconds in silence and then said, "Well, just remember that this house is for everyone, and if you want to stay, we have to be at peace." I gave a slight smile and replied, "Peace begins when one person respects the other, Alex. You remember that too." He didn't raise his voice, but he left visibly upset. Over the next few days, I started to notice that Teresa's family was changing little things to make me uncomfortable. The chair where I always sat at the table one day was occupied by a box of tablecloths. My coffee mug disappeared, and when I found it, it was in a corner of the yard with dirt inside. The space in the pantry I used for my things was filled with cans and bags that weren't mine. It wasn't a coincidence. I didn't respond with shouts. I responded with actions. One Saturday, I got up early and put my chair on the porch in a spot where the morning sun always hit. While I was having breakfast, Teresa's mother came over and said, "That chair belongs in the living room." "You should put it back," I replied. "I bought this chair and it stays where I put it." The woman didn't answer, but she walked away with a hard expression. That same day in the afternoon, I went to the market and bought fruit, bread, and cheese. I put it all in a box in my room. When Teresa noticed, she asked, "Are you going to keep food in your room now?" I replied, "It's what I buy with my money so it doesn't go missing." She pressed her lips together and said nothing more, but there was anger in her eyes. The small clashes became more frequent. They weren't shouts, but clashes of looks, measured words. Alex tried to stay out of it, but I could tell his silence was more for convenience than any desire to resolve things. As long as there wasn't a scene, he wouldn't get involved. One afternoon, while I was fixing a door in the yard, I heard Teresa's teenage cousin say to one of the brothers, "This old man won't last long." "You'll see." I stood still without them knowing I had heard. I didn't respond, but I filed those words away. That night I had dinner alone on the porch. The air was cool, and the streetlights flickered in the distance. I thought about everything that had happened since I moved in. I remembered every small gesture of contempt. Every word meant to make me feel small. And more than anger, what I felt was clarity. They thought I was cornered, that all I could do was accept it. What they didn't know was that they hadn't yet seen what I was capable of when they tried to erase me from my own land. On Sunday morning, I decided I wasn't going to stay cooped up in the house all day. I went to visit Manny, an old friend from my construction days who now owned a mechanic shop. I spent several hours there talking and drinking coffee. When I got back in the afternoon, Teresa greeted me with a dry tone. "You weren't here for lunch today." "We made a pot roast for everyone." I smiled and replied, "That's nice." "I had lunch with a friend." I went on my way. I saw her expression harden. She wanted me to always be under her control, available for her schedules, her rules. Every time I broke that expectation, she lost a little of her dominance over me, and that was slowly making her lose her patience. That same week, Alex asked me for money again. He said it was to cover some household expenses. I asked him what expenses. He stammered, saying it was for various things. "So," I replied, "if you can't tell me exactly what for, I can't help you." He got angry but didn't push it. He knew the ground was shifting. It wasn't yet time to act definitively, but it was time to make it clear that they couldn't move me around like a piece on their board. And every time I stood firm, they noticed, even if they didn't admit it. On Thursday night, while everyone was watching TV, I went out for a walk. The night air cleared my head. I passed by the church and stood there for a few minutes in silence, thinking, not about revenge yet, but about strategy. The patience I had learned over years of work was serving me now more than ever. When I returned, the house was quiet. I walked through the living room and saw my empty chair. I put it back in its place and sat down, not to watch TV, but just to be there present, occupying the space that was mine. They could move my things. They could talk behind my back. But as long as I was still there, reminding them that I was not invisible, the story was not yet written. The July heat in Newcastle is unforgiving. That week, the sun seemed to beat down directly on the tin roof of the patio, and the air inside the house became heavy. I got up early, as always, to take advantage of the morning coolness. I was sweeping the porch when I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I went in and found Teresa's teenage cousin dropping a pot on the floor. "It wasn't me. It fell by itself," he said with a shrug. The pot, one I had bought with my own money just a few months ago, was dented. I bent down, picked it up, and looking him straight in the eye, I said, "In this house, when you break something, you own up to it and take responsibility." He let out a mocking laugh and walked out without answering. Teresa, who was washing dishes, looked at me and said, "Oh, Arthur, don't get upset over a pot here. Everything belongs to everyone." That phrase was like pouring salt on an open wound. I looked at her and replied, "No, Teresa. Here nothing belongs to everyone. There are things here that I paid for, and I respect that they are for everyone to use, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be taken care of." She frowned but said nothing more. Mid-morning, Alex came home from work. As soon as he walked in, Teresa told him about the pot, but in her own way, saying I was in a bad mood and scolding the boys. Alex came to my room. "Dad, what's wrong?" "I don't want problems over silly things." I closed the book I was reading and replied, "Silly things are what start to break respect, son. And if you don't stop it in time, there's no going back." I don't know if he understood, but he fell silent. He ran a hand over his face and said, "It's just that we all have to learn to live together here." I looked at him and replied, "Living together starts with respecting what belongs to others. Otherwise, it's not living together, it's abuse." That day, I decided not to have lunch at home. I went to Mrs. Martha's diner, a friend of many years. She greeted me with a hug, served me a bowl of beef stew and a cold soda. We talked for a while, and it felt good to be heard without being judged. When I returned late in the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Teresa's mother called me into the kitchen. "Arthur, we need to talk." I sat down, although I already knew where this was going. "It's just that we've noticed you've been very distant lately, as if you don't want to share with us. And, well, we all have to cooperate here and help with what's needed." I took a deep breath and answered, "Cooperating is not obeying orders. Helping is not doing everything you don't want to do. And sharing doesn't mean that everything of mine can be used without respect." An uncomfortable silence fell. Teresa's aunt, who was listening, muttered something like, "Well, if he doesn't like it, he can leave." That's when I felt the first real surge of anger in weeks. I stood up slowly, looked at both of them, and said, "I'm not going anywhere. I bought this house, and as long as my name is on the deed, I'm staying here. Anyone who doesn't agree knows where the door is." And I walked out of the kitchen. That night, Alex came to my room, closed the door, and said in a low voice, "Dad, we can't go on like this." Teresa is very upset. So is my mother-in-law. If we keep this up, there are going to be big problems. I looked at him and said, "The problems don't start because I set boundaries, Alex. They start because you all think you can erase me from a place I built for everyone." He didn't answer, just ran a hand through his hair and left. The following days were a silent war. No one spoke to me more than necessary. Food was served and they didn't call me. I made my own without waiting for an invitation. I washed my dishes, put away my things, and spent more time out of the house than in it. But the tension exploded one Sunday afternoon. I was in the yard watering plants when I heard furniture being moved in my room. I went in and found Teresa's younger brother and the cousin moving my wardrobe. "What are you doing in here?" Or I asked in a tone that even I felt was stronger than usual. "Nothing. We're just going to store some things in here," the boy said, as if it were nothing. I walked over, slammed the wardrobe door shut, and told them, "Nothing that isn't mine gets stored in here." "Get out now." They looked at each other, and one of them muttered, "Crazy old man." I didn't hold back then. Crazy, no, the owner. "And if you ever come into my room again without permission, I won't be responsible for what happens." The two of them left, muttering something I didn't want to understand. That same night, I locked my room and hid the envelope with the deed inside a more secure box. Something told me I couldn't leave it in plain sight for another day. I slept little that night. I heard footsteps, doors, whispers. I didn't know if it was my imagination or if they were really planning something. But what I did know was that the time for just observing was coming to an end. It was no longer about small acts of disrespect. Now they were crossing the line of invading my personal space, and if they crossed that line once, they would do it again and again until there was nothing left that belonged to me. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I remembered something my father told me when I was young. Son, when they try to take your land from you, don't argue, act. That phrase stayed with me until dawn. And for me, that dawn meant something different. That patience has a limit, and mine was close. The week after the incident in my room was different. Not because Teresa's family had changed their attitude, but because I had already made a decision in silence. I wasn't going to wait for them to kick me out. I was going to make my move before they took the next step. And for that, I had to plan. On Monday morning, I left before everyone woke up. I walked to the square and sat on my usual bench, the one facing the church. There I found Manny, my old friend from my construction days. I bought him a coffee and we talked for a good while. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough for him to understand that I needed advice. When they no longer treat you like the owner in your own house, it's time to remind them who you are, he told me. His words stuck with me. Before going home, I stopped by the lawyer's office where I had signed the deed years ago. I greeted Mr. Gable, an older man who has known me for decades. I asked him casually about the procedure for making some changes to a property. I didn't give him details, but he explained the steps. I left there with a clearer head and a folded piece of paper in my pocket, a list of documents I might need. When I got home, the situation was the same. Teresa and her mother in the kitchen, her brothers watching TV, the cousin sleeping on the sofa. No one asked me where I had been. I locked myself in my room and put the list inside the envelope with the deed. The next few days I started to get organized. I went through my things, separating what was truly important from what I could leave behind without a problem. I realized that many of my belongings had no material value, but they were sentimental. Photographs, letters, tools I had used for years. I put them in a sturdy box and hid it in a corner of the wardrobe covered with an old blanket so no one would notice it. One Wednesday, I took advantage of everyone being busy to do something I hadn't done since we arrived. Inspect every corner of the house. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Just wanted to survey the terrain to know exactly which spaces were mine and which they had already occupied. I discovered that the storage shed in the yard, which was originally empty, was now full of boxes belonging to Teresa's family. I also saw that they had put a padlock on one of the rooms that was initially free. I wasn't surprised, but it confirmed that they were still advancing, taking up more and more space. I didn't say anything. I just observed. And as I observed, I was forming a mental map of my next move. On Thursday, I went to the market early. I bought my usual things, but I also stopped by the hardware store and bought a small combination lock. That same afternoon, I put it on my bedroom door. Teresa noticed and asked me with a tone somewhere between curiosity and annoyance. "What's that for?" I replied without raising my voice. "To protect my things, just like you protect yours." She said no more, but her expression confirmed that the message had been received. That padlock was my first visible act of defense. From then on, I felt I could start to reclaim my territory. On Friday, Alex asked me to go with him to the bank to make a deposit. I agreed. Not because I wanted to, but because I was interested in observing. While he was talking to the teller, I looked at the brochures and remembered Mr. Gable's words. I knew that if everything went as planned, I would soon need to go to the bank myself for other matters. Matters Alex couldn't even imagine. That night, while everyone was watching a TV show, I went out to the yard and looked up at the sky. I felt that warm air that comes before the rain. I thought of my father again, how he always said that a storm doesn't give a warning, but the one who is prepared doesn't fear it. I was preparing myself. On Saturday after lunch, I decided to visit another friend, Ernie, who had been my partner on several job sites. He knew people at the municipal office and at the county recorder's office. We spent the afternoon talking, and little by little I told him more details. I didn't need to tell him everything, but enough for him to understand that I was about to make an important decision. "If you're going to do it, Arthur, do it fast and without warning. Don't give them time to react," he told me. That advice became part of my plan. I returned home with a calm step as if nothing had happened. Inside, however, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. On Sunday, while we were having breakfast, Teresa's mother said out loud, almost as if it were an announcement. Soon, we're going to fix up the yard so we have more space for ourselves. Alex, who was there, nodded. I simply put my cup on the table and said, "The yard is not to be touched without my permission." The silence that followed was long. I wasn't looking to argue at that moment. What I was looking for was to make it clear that even though I was quiet most of the time, I was neither blind nor deaf, and I still had a voice. That afternoon, I went for a walk alone. I passed by the lawyer's office again, but I didn't go in. I just looked at the facade and thought about the list I had tucked away. I already had everything I needed except for one detail, and I would get that detail in the next few days. The following Monday, I left early saying I was going to the market, but I took a different route. I went to the county recorder's office to confirm something I already knew. The house was still in my name with no liens, no mortgages, no co-owners. I left there with a copy of the record under my arm. That paper along with the deed was the strongest proof I had. When I returned, I found everyone in the yard laughing and grilling meat. No one asked me where I had been. I poured myself a coffee, sat in my chair, and observed. They thought I was resigned. They didn't know that while they were distracted, I was already moving the pieces that would define the end of this story. That night, before going to sleep, I took out all the documents, the deed, the lawyer's list, the copy of the record. I laid them on the table and looked at them for a long time. I wasn't a man of letters, but I could read well enough to understand what I held in my hands. Power. And power, when used at the right moment, is stronger than any shout. I put everything away again and lay down. Outside, the wind began to blow harder, and inside me the calm of patience was giving way to the certainty that the time to act was getting closer. The August heat stuck to the skin like a damp blanket. From early on, the house was full of noise. The TV at full volume in the living room, a blender roaring in the kitchen, and mixed voices rising and falling as if in a marketplace. I was in my room, sitting by the window, drinking my coffee in silence. I knew it was going to be a long day. Mid-morning, I went out to the yard to hang my washed clothes. Teresa's younger brother was sitting on the curb smoking. The smoke hit me all at once. "No smoking here," I told him in a firm tone. He looked at me, let out a laugh, and replied, "Well, this is everyone's yard now." "Arthur." I stood still for a few seconds, then walked over to him, took the cigarette from his hand, and put it out against the wall. "This yard is still mine, and as long as I'm here, my rules are respected." He stood up, looking like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. At lunchtime, Teresa set the table with plates and silverware for everyone except me. It wasn't an oversight. I stood there observing the scene, and when everyone sat down, I went to the kitchen, took my plate and silverware, and served myself. I sat at the head of the table as I had always done, and began to eat. No one said a word, but the heavy silence felt like a fight without shouts. Alex came home that night. I noticed he was tired, but also had an air of discomfort. He told me we had been having too many frictions and that Teresa's family felt attacked. I looked at him and replied, "Respect is not an attack, son. What's happening here is that things are getting confused. They think that because I don't shout, I accept everything, and that's not the case." He didn't answer. The following days were a series of provocations. My chair on the porch disappeared one day and reappeared in the aunt's room. The space where I kept my grocery bag was occupied by water jugs that weren't mine. I even found that someone had opened one of my boxes in the wardrobe. That last one was what set me off the most. I decided I wasn't going to let anything else slide. On Wednesday, when I saw the teenage cousin using my tools to fix his bike, I approached him and said, "That toolbox is not to be touched. If you need something, you ask, and if you don't know how to ask, you don't use it." He looked at me with a smirk and said, "And if I don't?" I took a step closer, looked him in the eyes, and replied, "Then you're going to learn the hard way." He got up and left the tools on the table. That same afternoon, I put a second padlock on the wardrobe, where I kept my most important things. Teresa noticed and said, "Are you afraid we're going to steal something from you?" I replied, "I'm not afraid. I just have a good memory, and memory has taught me that it's better to be safe than sorry." On Friday, while I was having breakfast, Teresa's mother said out loud, "Well, I think we should reorganize the room soon so we can be more comfortable." It was as if she had thrown a stone at me. I put my cup on the table and replied, "Nothing gets moved here without my say-so. And if you don't like it, the door is open." The woman looked at me with contempt and left without saying a word. That night, Alex came to talk to me. Dad, don't you think you're being too hard? You're making everyone feel uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and told him, Alex, I'm the one who feels uncomfortable. Ever since this house stopped being my home and became a boarding house where everyone demands and no one is grateful. And I'll tell you something else. That deed is still in my name, and I'm not going to let anyone take what's mine. He was silent for a few seconds. So what are you going to do? He asked. I looked at him steadily. That, son, you'll find out when you need to find out. From then on, I changed my routine. I went out more often, but not always to the same place. Sometimes I'd go see Manny. Other times I'd stop by the lawyer's office. Other times I'd go to the market, but take longer than necessary. I didn't want them to know exactly where I was or who I was talking to. One Sunday afternoon, while everyone was busy in the kitchen, I went into the storage shed in the yard and checked the boxes they had put there. I wasn't interested in their contents, but I wanted to know how full they were. I realized that a good part of what they were storing were things they could get out quickly if necessary. I smiled to myself. In that house, the only ones who could really be displaced in an instant were them. That night, as I ate dinner alone, I felt the moment was approaching. I didn't know if it would be in a week or a month, but every gesture, every word, every invasion of my space was pushing the situation to a point of no return. Before going to sleep, I took out the deed and the copy of the record and placed them on the table next to the list Mr. Gable had given me. I turned on the lamp and stared at them. They weren't just papers. They were my key to getting out, and at the same time my weapon of defense. That night I dreamed of my father again. I saw him young, his hands full of dirt, looking at me and saying, "When it's time, son, it's time. Don't let it pass you by." I woke up with that phrase in my head, and as the morning sun came through the window, I knew the time was almost here. Monday dawned with a strange air. Maybe it was just me, but I felt that every sound in the house was louder, more present. The spoons clashing against the plates, the voices in the kitchen, the television on from early in the morning. I dressed calmly, put some papers in a folder, and left without saying where I was going. I walked to the lawyer's office. Mr. Gable received in me with his usual formality. "Do you have everything ready, Arthur?" he asked. I nodded and handed him the deed, the copy of the record, and my ID. "Perfect. We can have the rest in 2 days." I didn't go into detail, and he didn't ask. That's what I liked about Gable. He knew when not to say more than necessary. I left there and went straight to the bank. I withdrew a considerable amount of money that I had been saving for a long time. I put it in an envelope and tucked it inside my jacket. Then I stopped by the market. I bought a few small things, bread, coffee, some fruit, so as not to arouse suspicion. When I got back to the house, Teresa's aunt was at the door. She looked at me with that undisguised curiosity. "And where were you so early?" she asked. "Tending to my affairs," I said, and walked past her. There was nothing more to add. That day, I decided to spend more time on the porch reading an old newspaper. Teresa's mother passed by several times, looking at me out of the corner of her eye. I felt that something in my attitude was making her nervous. Maybe because for the first time in a long time they didn't see me as upset or resigned, but calm. In the afternoon, I looked for Alex. He was in his room, scrolling through his phone. "Son, I need you to sign a paper for me as a witness," I told him. He looked at me surprised. "What paper?" I replied. "Nothing serious, just a personal matter." He signed it without reading much. That paper had nothing to do with the house yet, but it was part of a move that would soon fit in with the rest. The next day I left early again. This time I went to see Ernie, the friend who had contacts at the municipal office. I brought him a coffee and we sat in his workshop. I told him I was about to make a major change and might need his help to move some papers quickly. Ernie smiled. "You just tell me when and we'll do it quietly." That phrase gave me the certainty that I had everything I needed. That afternoon, when I returned, I found the living room in disarray with bags and visas everywhere. I asked what was going on. Teresa replied, "We're figuring out how to reorganize to be more comfortable." I looked at her and said, "Don't move anything of mine. Not a single object." She shrugged, but her look said my confidence made her uncomfortable. That night, I put the folder with the documents in a different place outside of my room. I wasn't going to run the risk of them finding it if they decided to look. On Wednesday, while I was having breakfast, Alex told me he had heard I was doing some paperwork. I replied with a half smile. "People always talk, son. But not everything they say is true." I knew that intrigue was part of the game. I spent the rest of the day moving around as if nothing was wrong. but inside I felt that every piece was falling into place. If everything went as planned, in a few days, the story of this house was going to change and not in their favor. That night, while everyone was talking in the living room, I stayed on the porch, listening to the wind, and silently confirmed to myself I was ready. On Thursday, I woke up before the rooster crowed. I got dressed, put the folder with the documents in a leather bag, and left without making a sound. The street was cold, and that morning air gave me the energy I needed. I walked with a firm step to the lawyer's office. Mr. Gable was already waiting for me, ready to sign. "Arthur?" he asked. I nodded. We sat down, reviewed the papers one more time, and he explained each point. I didn't need him to. I had already read everything at home, but I let him talk. I signed where he indicated, once, twice, 3 times. He also signed, stamped the documents, and handed me a copy. "With this, the change will be official in a couple of days," he said. I put everything away carefully and shook his hand. I left the lawyer's office and went straight to the bank. I made another important transaction, this time with a clear objective. When the teller handed me the receipt, I folded it and put it with the papers. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone would understand at first glance, but for me, every move was connected. Before going home, I stopped by Mr. Roth's hardware store, a man I had known for decades. I bought some large boxes from him and asked him to deliver them to my address. "Moving, Arthur?" he asked with a smile. "Something like that," I replied. It wasn't a lie. When I got home, I found Teresa and her mother in the kitchen talking in low voices. They saw me come in, but didn't ask anything. I went up to my room, closed the door, and began to pack some things into the boxes. Only what was necessary, what had value to me. The rest could stay. That afternoon, Alex arrived and found me in the middle of the task. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked. "Organizing my things," I replied without looking up. "Why are you leaving?" I shrugged. "And you never know, son. It's always good to be ready." That night, I put the folder with the documents in a place only I knew. A false bottom in an old suitcase that had belonged to my father. No one but me knew that compartment existed. On Friday morning, I went out again. This time, I went to the county recorder's office, handed the papers to the clerk, and signed another document. "This settles everything," he said. His words were like placing the last piece of a puzzle I had been assembling for weeks. When I returned, the house was silent. Too silent. I walked in and found everyone in the living room. Teresa, her mother, the brothers, the cousin. Alex was standing. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I sat in a chair across from them. "I'm listening." Teresa was the first to speak. "We just think it's not comfortable for everyone to live like this anymore. We think it would be best if you found a place to be more peaceful." I stared at her for a few seconds, then let my gaze pass over each of them. "I see. So you want me to leave the house that I bought?" Alex tried to soften the blow. "It's not that, Dad, but there are just too many people here." I raised my hand to interrupt him. "Don't worry, son. As it happens, I resolved everything I needed to resolve today." I stood up, went to my room, and came back with the folder. I placed it on the table, opened it slowly, and took out the deed and the copy of the record. "You see this? It says clearly who the owner of this house is, and it's been the same person since day one. Me." I saw their faces change. Some turned pale, others frowned. Teresa crossed her arms. "And what does that mean?" I leaned forward. "It means I decide who lives here. And as of today, this house is not for everyone. It's for whoever respects the rules. And you haven't respected them." Alex took a step toward me. "Dad, don't do this." I looked at him steadily. "Son, I didn't start this. I'm just finishing what you all began." I took another paper from the folder. "Here is the notice I filed today. As of next week, all of you will have to leave." A heavy silence fell over the room. Teresa's mother stood up, red with anger. "You can't do that." I straightened up. "Of course I can, and I'm going to." I turned around and went up to my room. I locked the door in and sat on the bed. Outside, I heard agitated voices, hurried footsteps, doors opening and closing. I didn't care. I knew that in that moment I had shattered the illusion they had that they could control me. I slept better that night than I had in a long time. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was different. There was no laughter, no music, just a dense silence broken by whispers from the kitchen. I knew they were talking about me, about what I had said the night before. I didn't care. I poured my coffee, drank it on the porch, and let the sun warm my face. After a while, Alex approached. He looked tired, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. "Dad, are you really going to do this?" he asked. I looked at him. not with harshness, but with firmness. Alex, I gave you this house so you could have a home, not so it could become a place where I have no voice. I gave you all time, patience, and respect. I didn't receive the same in return, and everything has a limit. He tried to argue, to say we could talk it out. But his tone wasn't one of reconciliation, but of negotiation, to lose as little as possible. And I was done with half measures. There's nothing more to talk about, son. The decision is made. In the days that followed, the house became a battlefield of tension. Teresa avoided crossing paths with me, but her brother shot me looks filled with resentment. The teenage cousin would make noise on purpose when he passed my door. Teresa's mother ignored me completely. I didn't respond to any of these provocations. On Thursday, the official notice arrived. The mailman knocked on the door and delivered the large envelope. Alex received it and left it on the table. Teresa opened it without waiting. She read it in silence, and when she finished, said, "We have 1 week." There were arguments among them, phone calls, improvised plans. I didn't interfere. On Sunday morning, I saw Teresa's brothers packing their things. The cousin was carrying bags to the car. Teresa was going back and forth with boxes. Alex came into my room. "Dad, I don't know if I'll be able to find a place that quickly, but I'll do my best." I looked at him and for the first time in a long time spoke to him calmly. "I don't wish you ill, Alex. I just hope this helps you understand that decisions always have consequences." By Tuesday, the yard was full of things ready to be loaded. Teresa's mother walked past me without a greeting. I didn't expect one. By mid-afternoon, the last car pulled out of the driveway. Alex was the last to leave. He stopped at the door, looked at me, but said nothing. Neither did I. I closed the gate and stood for a moment looking at the empty street. The house was silent. I walked through every room. Some were dirty, others empty. I didn't feel sadness. I felt peace. I made myself a coffee, drank it on the porch, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, this place truly belonged to me, not just on paper. In the following days, I cleaned the house, rearranged my things, and put padlocks on the rooms I wasn't using. I went back to my old routine. Early coffee, the market, chats with friends. The tranquility had returned, but it wasn't the same as before. Now I was more aware of what it cost to maintain it. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, I thought about Alex. I didn't know where he was or how he was doing. Maybe one day he would understand that it wasn't a matter of money or property, but of respect. And if he didn't understand, it wasn't my job to teach him anymore. What I did know was that I didn't regret it. Doing what's right isn't always comfortable. But sleeping with a clear conscience is worth more than any discomfort. And if you who are listening to me have made it this far, I'll tell you something. Never let anyone erase you from your own story. It doesn't matter if you're young or old, rich or poor. Your dignity is priceless. Now tell me, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? And while you're at it, tell me, from what corner of the world are you listening to me? And don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes a story like this is the push someone needs to reclaim their